I was born and raised in Appalachia. I spent my first 22 years in Kentucky, then moved to Tennessee. I'd always loved the outdoors and was lucky enough to get a job with the Forest Service a few years after high school. My family back in Kentucky had a lot of issues, and being in another state without cell reception, it felt like an escape. I learned a lot about survival in my time with the Forest Service. I loved the wide open spaces and the sense of peace being in nature, rather than spending my days stuck in a cubicle under fluorescent lights. And I like helping people. I've helped many lost hikers find their way back, and I've even helped with injured hikers and rescues. It was the perfect job for me. I live alone in a trailer with my Labrador Barkley. My nephew Riker flew in to visit a few weeks after his college graduation. He'd always wanted to hike the Appalachian Trail, and I supported this, but only if he is prepared. Too many young people watch a few survival shows and they think they're ready to handle nature. They are not. I was always really close to Riker, despite being estranged from the rest of the family. I never settled down or had kids, mostly because of work. So, Riker was the closest relative I had, and I wanted to pass along the skills I had before I got too old. I met Riker at the airport, and he gave me a huge bear hug. We went back to my trailer, and I cooked him up some steak and potatoes. We talked about our plans for the week. I'd taken some vacation time to spend the entire week hiking together. We would set out on the trail tomorrow morning. I strongly suggested Riker get a good night's sleep. We would have our work cut out for us tomorrow. But before he retired to the guest room, I needed to give him a warning. Hey, make sure you close the curtains in there before you go to sleep, all right? I told him. Riker looked confused. Okay, but there's no one out here. We're literally in the middle of nowhere. It's not like anyone's going to look in the window, he said, laughing. We'll talk about it tomorrow, I assured him. Luckily, Riker was always very respectful about following my household rules, so he agreed. After spending some time getting our equipment ready for tomorrow, I headed to bed myself. I made sure to close my bedroom curtains before drifting off. You see, when I first moved out here, I used to like the moonlight streaming in through my window at night. Being in a secluded area, I didn't think it was a problem. Until this one night I woke up, I was still pretty tired and I glanced out the window next to my bed. I noticed two red lights a few inches apart. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. They weren't lights, they were eyes, and they were unnaturally red. Now I know the wildlife in the area, and there was nothing that could explain what I saw. As I watched, the eyes began to slowly rise, as if whatever creature was attached to them stood up. I slowly backed out of the bedroom, and I shut the door. I slept on the living room couch that night, and I have never slept with my curtains open again on the morning of our trip. I woke up early. Anxious and excited to get started, I gave up trying to sleep and started brewing coffee around 5 a.m. Although I tried to be as quiet as possible, Riker woke up around 5:30, so we decided to eat breakfast and get an early start. As I was making breakfast, Riker glanced over to see Barkley standing outside on the front porch, scratching on the sliding glass door. He got up to let him in. Just as he got to the door, I said, "Wait." Riker paused, looking confused. I motioned for Riker to follow me into the living room, and I pointed to Barkley, who was sleeping peacefully on his bed. "Keep the door closed," I said. He nodded. "Is it a stray?" he asked. I shook my head. "You see, Barkley is a very distinctive-looking dog. He was older, and his coat was going gray. He also had a scar over his left eye from a fight with a raccoon many years ago." Riker glanced back to the sliding glass door. He noticed the dog was gone. This was another rule that I needed to tell Riker. If you see anything that looks like your pet trying to come into your house or your campsite, you make sure it's really them. Riker asked what just happened, but I didn't think he believed me, so I just told him I'd explain later since we needed to be on our way. While Riker did seem disturbed by the whole incident, he was a trooper and was ready to set out an hour later. The next few hours of hiking were amazing. We took in the most beautiful views and we got a chance to really catch up. I've been debating when to tell Riker about the rules for the trail, but I was worried he wouldn't take it seriously, at least not yet. Before he arrived for his visit, I tried explaining that the Appalachian Mountains have a strange supernatural activity, but he wasn't really interested. Now I'll admit I didn't believe most of it either at first. It took seeing it with my own eyes for me to understand, but that's why I'm here with my nephew to show him that things are out there, that we can't understand everything. But if we follow the rules, then we'll be okay. After another hour of hiking, Riker began to look uneasy, and he stopped every few steps to look around. Finally, I asked him what was wrong. "Don't you hear that?" he asked. I shook my head. We continued walking while staying quiet, and then I did hear it. The sound was similar to a tornado siren off in the distance, but it sounded distorted. I stopped Riker in his tracks. "We need to get as far away from that noise as possible." I said. Riker briefly tried to argue that we should get closer in case it's a weather alert siren, but I let him know it was deadly serious that we get away from the source. We started running in the opposite direction. Eventually, the sound started to fade like it was getting farther away. But a few minutes later, we heard a loud blast from the siren almost right in front of us. "What the hell?" Riker said, putting his hands over his ears. We were running hard now, which was extremely unpleasant, carrying all our equipment. Suddenly, we were forced to stop dead in our tracks. The ground beneath us started to shake, and what looked like an old vine-covered telephone pole with speakers at the top began moving across the trail. That siren was deafening. Riker and I booked it. We didn't stop moving until we hadn't heard the siren for a good 20 minutes. We both tripped over routes several times and were pretty scratched up and out of breath by the end. Riker demanded an explanation. He wanted to know what the hell was going on out here, so I decided it was time to have the talk with him. He'd be much more open-minded now that he'd seen some things of his own, so I agreed to give him a rundown. It was hard to remember all the strange things that had happened out here and how to avoid him. But when Riker told me he was going to hike the Appalachian Trail, I made a list of rules for him, and I wrote down what I could remember. Always sleep with your curtains closed. Leaving them open can result in waking up to red eyes peering through. I've only had one brief encounter with the red eyes, but another ranger I knew. He wasn't so lucky. Dan Williams was young, around 30, and in fantastic health. One day, he just didn't report for duty. This was not typical for him, as he was one of the most dependable people I ever met. Being a close friend of Dan's, I drove to his house and I knocked on the door. After getting no answer, I saw that it was unlocked. I entered and I called out to him. There was no answer. When I got to his bedroom, I had a bad feeling. I opened the door to find him laying on the bed, completely still. His eyes and his mouth were wide open, frozen in the worst expression of horror I've ever seen. I quickly called 911, and when I reported back to our boss, he asked if the curtains in the bedroom were open. I confirmed they were. I tried to ask why he wanted to know, but he wouldn't tell me anything. After my own encounter, I started closing them every night. If your pet is trying to get into your home or campsite, make sure it's really them. Letting the wrong one in is like putting out a welcome mat to an evil spirit. If you hear a siren out in the woods that doesn't sound quite right, avoid getting close to it at all costs. The sound you're hearing, it's not a siren at all. It's a cryptid that uses the sound to lure people in. This creature disguises itself as an old, rusty telephone pole or speaker. Whenever its intended victims get within range, it will detach from the ground and chase them down. It's been said by some of the older folk who are familiar with this cryptid. If caught, the victim's screams are harvested to power the siren. There's a creature that roams the Appalachian Mountains called a wampus cat. It's unlike any other large feline in that it has 6 legs, 4 in front and 2 in the back. It's larger than a full-grown lion and has unnatural abilities. These include being able to outrun arrows and in some cases even bullets. The wampus cat can walk on its hind legs and has these piercing golden eyes. Avoid making contact with it at all costs. Making eye contact results in a hypnotic state. If you become hypnotized, you'll be unable to move and be eaten. If you encounter a wampus cat, your best bet is to try to catch it off guard and shoot it, or try to hide if you don't have a gun. Forget outrunning it. You wouldn't have a prayer. If you're out in the woods and you hear someone say your name, but there's no one visible, pretend you didn't hear it. You may also hear other things, like the sound of a baby crying or someone calling for help in a monotone voice. As unnerving as this is to hear, ignore it. Even so much as turning around or following the voice for a few steps can lure you to your death. Several years ago, while working on trail maintenance, I had a woman frantically run up to me, screaming for help. She said her name was Jenny, and explained that she and her husband were hiking when he started acting strange. He got really quiet and he stopped to look around every few steps. She asked what was wrong, and he said he thought he heard their son call out to him. Now this wasn't possible because their son, 10-year-old Brandon, passed away the year before. He was hit by a car while riding his bike. Jenny tried to talk him out of following the voice, telling him this couldn't be Brandon, but her husband was very determined and refused to listen. He went off trail to follow the voice. She looked for him for over an hour, but almost getting lost herself, she had to stop. I agreed to help look for him, but eventually had to call him back up as I was unable to locate him. He was quickly declared missing, and a full-on search began. Now, sadly, this story doesn't have a happy ending. His body was recovered on the bottom of a steep drop-off. It was unclear if he jumped or was pushed. Don't whistle outside at night. I made this mistake once when I was younger and camping with my dog. This was before Barkley. It was my old dog Rex, and I'd been warned by other forest workers not to whistle at night. But naturally, I was in my early 20s and I thought it was just some old wives' tale. I've been hiking all day, and I started drinking by the campfire as it got dark. Rex was pretty good about staying nearby, so I let him wander off the leash during the day. As it got dark, though, I became apprehensive about him getting lost or hurt, so I whistled for him to come back. He didn't respond to my whistle at first, which was very unusual for him. I couldn't handle something happening to Rex. He'd been my one constant companion in a pretty solitary life. "Rex," I said as I whistled again, louder this time. I noticed that it sounded like my whistle had an echo, which didn't make any sense. Rex finally ran back to me. He was acting differently, though. He was clearly on edge, looking into the woods and growling. I shined my flashlight in the direction he was focused on, but I didn't see anything. I finished up the rest of what was in my flask and turned in for the night. I woke up around 2 a.m. with a distinct feeling I was being watched. I got out of my tent to look around. The light on my flashlight kept dimming. Despite having a new battery, I smacked it, trying to eat it to work. The first thing I noticed is that Rex was nowhere to be found. I called out to him and whistled again, and just then my flashlight went out. I heard a distant crunching of branches, and I got my flashlight to work just enough to see the outline of something about 10 feet from my campsite. It appeared to be a rail-thin white figure that looked vaguely humanoid. Its stature was what really alarmed me. It was extremely tall. I'm talking about 7 feet tall, but walked hunched over. Its neck was also unnaturally long, and its head was looking forward. The creature was moving with a slow, distorted crawl. I stood in silence. What the hell? I said to myself, and this was a huge mistake. The figure's head turned at a sharp, unnatural angle, and it began to screech. I never heard a noise like this before. Think of a distorted human scream mixed with an injured animal. I dove back into my tent, grabbing my beer repellent and knife. Stupidly, I hadn't brought my gun on this trip. I could hear it screeching outside my tent, and I knew it was time to defend myself. Just as I turned around, I heard a snarl and sharp bark. Rex, I thought. The figure let out another screech, and it charged back into the woods. I noticed Rex had blood on his muzzle. I hugged him, checking for any harm, but luckily, he was okay. He was still very nervous, though. "Good boy," I said. Needless to say, I don't whistle in the woods anymore. If you become lost on the trail for longer than a day, don't trust everything you see. An old friend of mine, John, who also worked for the Park Service, became lost during a solo excursion. Now he was a very skilled survivalist and knew all the trails like the back of his hand, so I was shocked when he went missing. He was found about a week later, but he wasn't himself. He babbled on and on about finding a cottage with a woman living there who rescued him. He said she gave him tea and pastries that allowed him to stay in her guest room. He reported feeling drowsy the whole week it was there. But he had these strange memories of the woman coming in and out of his room with food and tea. He said some of the tea had sliced mushrooms floating in it. When he was asked how he got out, he said he just woke up one day on the forest floor. John attempted to show his rescuers where the home was, but there was nothing there. He became obsessed with searching for it, and the rescuers had to convince him to take some time off and get medically cleared. John's mental state never recovered. He lives in a long-term care facility now. At first, I assumed his experience was just a high-stress event that may have triggered underlying mental health issues, but other rangers have told me this wasn't a unique story. So like I said, if you're lost on the Appalachian Trail and you see a cottage in the woods, don't trust it. Stop and ask yourself if what you're seeing makes sense before going in to ask for help. If you see a woman in her 60s wearing silver-eyed glasses wandering around in the woods, and she asks you to get back to the trail, assist her. If you successfully help her find her way back, you'll be granted good luck for the next 7 years. You see, this woman was a very avid and determined hiker. She got lost off trail one day and was unable to find her way back. Her body was recovered a few years later. She is a benevolent spirit, and hikers who have seen her have described her as having an infectious smile. A coworker of mine told me about a case where a lost hiker reported seeing this woman while off trail. The woman with the silver glasses said she was lost too. The hiker reported they walked together for a few hours just talking about life and trying to find a trail. The woman suggested making a turn that did lead back. The hiker was ecstatic, but when he turned around to thank her, she was gone. The woods should never be completely silent. You should always be able to hear something. Bugs, animals, birds, water, wind, basically anything. If you're ever on the trail and you notice it's completely silent, keep moving until things sound normal again. You should also talk, hum, sing, or turn on music to break the silence until you get to a normal area. Now, I don't have first-hand experience with not following this rule, as the uneasy feeling of being in total silence is usually enough to keep me moving. There's an old man with a long beard and walking stick who may approach your campsite as if you were sitting around the fire with friends or family. He will calmly take a seat and begin sharing a story. Do not ask him who he is, interrupt the story, or walk away while he is talking. Legend has it that if you do, someone from your group will walk into the woods during the night and you will never see them again. I narrowly avoided this a few years ago, camping with a few of my buddies as the old man approached. I was about to ask if anyone knew him when my friend put his hand over his mouth and shook his head. He gave me a very serious look. After all the strange things I'd encountered over the years, I took his word for it and I stayed silent. The old man's story was actually pretty good. While hiking in Appalachia, you may come across a large camp in an area that is not designated for camping. Usually these are pretty far off trail. These are off-grid communities that don't like outsiders. The camp will likely consist of handmade tents, various survival supplies, and oftentimes there are active fires, sometimes even with food still cooking, but there won't be anyone there. Now, it may be tempting to look around or even help yourself to food or supplies, but do not do it. Even if you notice something at the site that was stolen from your campsite. Although these camps appear empty, you are being watched in real time, and you will be attacked very quickly if you take anything. These groups protect their camps at all costs, and they not only outnumber you, but also know the terrain much better than you. And that was the list I'd written out for Riker. We talked over everything as we set up for camp that night. Despite his arrogance before, at this point he was convinced to follow the rules. We prepared dinner and had a good talk. We talked about old times, and I turned in around midnight. I slept peacefully for a while, and then I began having this strange dream. I was sitting on a rocking chair, on the large porch of what appeared to be an old farmhouse. It was dusk and the air was still. Off in the distance, I noticed an animal approach. It was about the size of a large dog, but as it got closer, I noticed something wasn't right. Although it had the stature and build of a dog, the animal's head was that of a rabbit, but it was much bigger than any rabbit I'd ever seen. I stood up as it approached. Its eyes were these hollow, dark sockets, and I didn't understand how it was able to see. I started panicking, trying to unlock the door to the house, and it wouldn't open. Footsteps approached on the porch behind me as I pounded on the door, and just then my eyes shot open, and I was in the tent, hyperventilating, relieved it was only a dream. I turned over and got comfortable again. I was starting to drift off when I felt my blanket slowly slide off of me, and I froze. The air became ice cold despite the temperature outside. I heard whispers all around me. They were all different, distinct voices. "Uncle James," yelled Riker. I sat up. He dove into my tent, trying to catch his breath. "Did something just happen to you too?" he asked, and I nodded. "I read about this a while back. I think it's the Bell Witch," Riker said. I was somewhat familiar with the historical haunting, but I've never known anyone who was haunted by her on the trail. Riker and I packed up our things, and we moved camps. The next day, Riker laughed about how he had something to add to my list, and I nodded. Most don't realize just how old these mountains are. They've been on this earth for millions of years. They've seen things that no human has or ever will. I have discovered so much on the trail, but I doubt I'll get to know all its secrets in my lifetime. "Riker, can you promise me something?" I asked. "Sure, anything," he said. "When you tell other people about this place, don't leave out the good things," I said. Riker looked at me, confused. "What? What I mean is, I know a lot of weird stuff happens out here, but it's also one of the most beautiful and peaceful places on Earth. There's so many good people here too, you know. I just want you to make sure you don't leave that out whenever you tell your friends back home about this trip." "Don't worry, Uncle James. I actually have some news. I'm moving out here next month. I got a job at the community college. I want to be closer to the trail, and now that I'm graduated and everything, going back home I don't know, just doesn't seem like a good idea to me." I laughed. "So even after seeing all that, you're ready for more?" He nodded. I gave him the sheet of paper with a list. "All right, well, keep this up to date," I said, smiling. "You're gonna need it." March 19, 2002, I was recently recruited to work for the U.S. government, and today I'm preparing for my first case. We're investigating a company called Ryan Global, as reports have surfaced that they're performing unauthorized and illegal genetic enhancements on the animals whose meat they would then sell. From that introduction, you may assume I work for the FDA. Maybe the CDC. Both assumptions are wrong. I work for the FBI. My name is Dexter Watson. And to be more specific, I work for the supernatural branch of the FBI, and I'm well aware such a branch doesn't exist. We, as opposed to one of those other, more mundane organizations, were called in because these genetic enhancements may have crossed over what we call the Clarkson threshold. I'm not sure why we call it that. I'm still new here, but it describes the invisible line separating the things the public knows from the things we prevent them from knowing. The FDA and CDC, they're well below the Clarkson threshold. As I said, I'm still new here. I was a junior in college last year when they started recruiting me. I was at Penn State on a football scholarship, the only way I could afford to attend any college, and they've been putting me through a few tests I didn't actually know were tests when they were happening, which was rather frightening. Regardless, I passed them all, and I was informed of my passing by an unmarked envelope. Also included in that letter was an offer. Meet them at a disclosed location for a job offer. It was as simple as that. There was no figure given, no description either. The only information it all provided was at the bottom, a modified version of the FBI's logo. It was like the normal logo, all except the red and white striped insignia on the front where normally it was blank. On this version, there were two things in front of it. There was a sort of oblong ovular shape running diagonally, and crossed with it was a long rectangle, with various sections of it jutting in or out to create a very clunky shape. No one has told me what either of them represent as of yet. I'm not sure why I took the job. Maybe it was because I was tired of doing nothing with my life. Maybe it was the allure of high pay and job security. Or hell, maybe it was because I wanted to help people. Whatever the reason was, I met them at the location and, after hearing the details of the job, accepted. 3 weeks of vigorous training and briefings later, I'm here 2 days away from my first mission. It's a routine one to be sure, as while genetic enhancements sound exciting and dangerous, they hardly ever turn out to be, at least so I'm told. They say we usually catch on to them before it gets out of hand, as genetic engineering leaves a pretty obvious energy signature when one knows where to look for it. I've been partnered with Scarlett Gill, an agent who joined right around the same time as me, and as a result, we worked together throughout the majority of our training. We've spent quite a bit of time together as a result, but very little time is allowed for personal talk during the 3 introductory weeks. We've worked out, drilled, and joked together, and we'd even come to like each other, but neither of us had been allowed to know a thing about the other's personal life until training was complete. We're together now, Scarlett and I, as we pass the time the night before the job. She's certainly nice and enjoyable enough to be around, but more importantly, she's loyal. The FBI seems to enjoy making us believe we're in life-threatening scenarios when, in fact, it's merely another drill. Something we enjoy significantly less, but every time they have, she's had my back wire to wire. Apparently noticing my introspective attitude, she raised her eyebrows and said, "Penny, for your thoughts? I'm afraid you wouldn't be getting your money's worth." I shrugged. It's just a little weird. These past 3 weeks have been a bit of a whirlwind, and the most boring thing we've done is about to be our first assignment. I'm still holding out hope that we're going to run into some kind of mutant chicken or something, she joked. Maybe a man-eating cow. Are we really lowering our standards for excitement to a man-eating cow? I replied. I mean, even I wasn't that pessimistic. Whatever, she said, rolling her eyes and leaning back in her chair. I'm just ready to be out of this place, to see people again. Maybe the CEO will be some cute single guy who just needs the right girl to get him back on track. Maybe I'll meet the man of my dreams on this mission. I mean, it's May. You can't be expecting Ben Affleck, I jokingly teased. Don't get your hopes up. Oh, and what? I assume Jennifer Lopez is waiting there for you. She responded something like that. I nodded and we laughed. We both joked, sharing some pre-mission banter, but in reality there would be no matchmaking during the mission, and we both knew it. We would be arriving unannounced, and there was no telling how anyone at the company would react. Sure, it was just your average check-in to keep them honest, but what if they panicked? It wouldn't be the least likely thing to happen. When the laughter trailed off into silence, Scarlett said, "You know what? We should probably get to bed. It's a long drive to May." "Sure is," I replied. We, being rookies on a routine mission, hadn't been found important enough to garner a full-on flight, so we were stuck driving one of the old, clunky SUVs the Bureau kept, to the best of my knowledge, for the sole purpose of hazing. So, yawning, I bid her good night, and we retreated to our respective bunks for the night. March 20th. I'm not usually prone to nightmares, but I had one last night. It was a forest, I believe, and a faceless man stood in front of me. Behind him, and to his left, lay a wild horse, bucking and neighing loudly. It was surrounded by thorns, and every time it reared back on its hind legs, it came down, impaling itself on them. To his right was Scarlett, bound to her hands and feet. I didn't know what was going on. I tried to ask him, but I found that I was frozen in place, unable to move or do anything as the faceless man looked down at me tauntingly. I woke in a cold sweat an hour before my alarm was set to go off, so I quietly showered, got dressed, and walked outside, allowing the brisk morning air to fill my lungs. It was always calming being out this early. It put it all in perspective. The assignment was just an assignment. The dream was just a dream. The base we were at was tucked away in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, by far the most beautiful place I'd been in my life. And as the sun rose to the east, I leaned on a railing overlooking an immense horizon. The mountain dropped off beneath me, only to pick up in a forest that spread out below me. After what must have been miles of forest, the first rays that would eventually become the blazing ball of light that was the sun peeked out at me. I took a deep breath in, then exhaled. I always wondered why they wasted such a great view on a military base. A voice from behind me surprised me, causing me to jump slightly. I turned around to see Carmen Clay, my direct supervisor, who coincidentally had been promoted to her post at around the same time Scarlett and I had arrived. She walked over to the railing and leaned on it as well, looking out across the horizon. So much natural beauty contrasted with the stark coldness of the Bureau. It's 2 different worlds. I cleared my throat and replied, "Yes, ma'am." She looked at me for a moment. "You have something not a lot of people do. You know, You know how to talk yourself off the ledge, and that'll get you a long way in this business, she said. Thank you. She gazed down at the forest for another moment before continuing. A wise man once told me that for everything that goes right in a mission, 10 more are bound to go wrong by the time you finish celebrating. Remember that? I nodded, letting her words sink in as she returned to the main compound. At first, it just seemed like she was getting in on the fun of piling on the new guy, but that didn't at all fit what I knew about her. There was more to the saying than just a poke in the ribs. Scarlett was awake half an hour later, and a briefing followed not long after. The briefing was relatively short. We already knew most of the details. It was just some general information that hadn't been covered yet. Then we were off just like that. There was no send-off, no hearty goodbye. The briefing ended and we were on our way. It was a 3-hour drive to Ryan's headquarters in Old Town, Maine, and I drove the first half, Scarlett picking up the back end. The conversation remained light when it was alive, which wasn't the majority of the ride, but still there was a generally optimistic feel to the ride. First, we passed the sign informing us we'd entered Maine, a milestone achieved very early on in our journey. After a bit of a drive, we saw the signs for Old Town. Our massive, bulky SUV stood out in the small town, even as we neared the center of industry that was Rayon headquarters. All the vehicles up here were small, either tiny sedans or, for the more wealthy drivers, little convertibles or sports cars. We towered over almost all of them, and word spread fast in small towns like these. People were wondering why we were there, and they weren't shy about showing it. We drew stairs, and the closer we got to our destination, a few people even took out their phones and dialed the number when they saw us. When a third person did so, I pointed it out to Scarlett. Someone's getting advance notice we're here, I told her, gesturing back to the man on the phone. They're tight-knit up here. So much for the element of surprise. She nodded. Not a great sign. If they've got people out to let them know if someone's coming, they've probably got something to hide. With that, we came into view of the massive, sprawling complex. The Rayon headquarters was a sight to behold, the main entrance dominated by a huge statue of the company's logo in the middle of a U-shaped driveway. The front of the building was a large glass room, but at the height the sun was in the sky. We couldn't see into it yet. The glass rose up to more than 2 stories high, then dipped back down before turning into cement and rising up into offices on the higher levels. It was only 6 stories high, but its size came in its width. We just reached the far edge of the building, and we still had nearly a quarter mile to go to reach the entrance in the middle of it. The headquarters seemed big enough to be its own city. Why would anyone need this much space? Scarlett murmured, echoing my thoughts. As she approached the driveway, she asked, "Do we just park in there? I don't see a lot or anything." "We've got government plates. It's not like we're going to get towed." "But that's definitely weird," I concurred. Then she pulled into the driveway behind a fountain, parking the car in front of the front doors. There was a surprising lack of activity, I noticed, as we approached the glass doors. Ours was the only car in the long driveway, and we appeared to be the only people making our way into the building. And as we entered, we saw that it was empty as well, save for a receptionist at the desk. I glanced curiously at Scarlett, as no greeting came from her, and we slowly let the door close behind us. "Hello, ma'am," Scarlett called out, her voice echoing around the silent lobby. "We're here with the FBI. We'd like to take a look around." There was no response. It was a large lobby, and it took us some time to get closer after several more unsuccessful attempts at communication. Our footsteps on the tile filled the otherwise empty room as we made our way towards the desk. And then, as details became more clear, it was obvious that something was off. The receptionist had a blank look on her face, so she wasn't asleep, yet still she didn't reply. We hadn't noticed until we got far enough away from the windows that the natural light failed to reach us, but the lights were out. We both felt the oddness of the situation, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw Scarlett's hand drift over to the butt of her pistol, prepared to draw it in a moment's notice. I did the same. When we arrived at the desk, she still hadn't reacted to us or even moved. Something was definitely wrong wordlessly. I waved my hand in front of her eyes for a moment. Nothing. Then I held the back of my hand in front of her nose. I glanced up at Scarlett. Nothing, I said. She's dead. Dead? She asked, surprised. What the hell? Why is she still at the desk? Maybe she had a condition? Guessed. Call it in. I'll check for a bracelet or something. She nodded and retreated a few steps back to report it back to our superiors, and I made my way around the desk. There was no indicator anywhere to show that she had some sort of medical condition, but it wasn't long before I did find the cause of death. When I tilted her body forwards, a bullet wound slowly oozed out blood. It was a small hole, most likely a pistol caliber. And when I opened her shirt to find the exit wound, I saw that someone had cleaned it up. What the hell? I mumbled, looking over to Scarlett, who was still fiddling with her radio. When she saw me looking, she said, "Damn thing won't work. I'm just getting static. What's the deal with her?" "She was killed," I replied, "and someone didn't want us to know. They cleaned up the front of it, so..." Then it clicked. We both came to the epiphany at the same time. I vaulted over the desk, making for the door across the long lobby, and as I did so, the metal safety grate began to slide down, its gears grinding loudly as it slowly began the process of cutting off our path to freedom. Scarlett had a head start, having already been on the other side of the desk, and she reached the doors when the grate was still almost a foot off the ground. She pounded on the glass with her fist. Then, after it was unsuccessful, she slipped her gun out of its holster and fired it into the glass once, twice, 3 times. However, the bullets didn't penetrate. The glass was bulletproof. "Damn it," she shouted, slamming the butt of her gun into the ground. I caught up with her at that point, and I looked through the thin slits that allowed light in through the grate. "What the hell's going on?" I breathed, shaking my head. Scarlett slowly stood, and she looked out into the lobby. "We're stuck here." For a moment, her words echoed faintly down the dark room, and we let it sink in, taking stock of our situation. Something was going on, and somebody was willing to kill to keep it under wraps. Whoever it was very wealthy and intelligent. They not only known to jam radio frequencies, but had the means of doing it, and they were either in a position of power at the company or commanded enough respect to lead enough followers to establish this lockdown. I narrowed it down to either the CEO or a head scientist, with the CEO being the more likely of the two. But this was all in the first minute of having this knowledge. "So what now?" Scarlett asked, sliding her gun back into her holster. "There's only one thing we can do," I replied. "Find out what they're trying to hide." "Are you crazy?" she exclaimed. This was supposed to be a routine checkup. "We're not equipped to get in a gunfight. For all we know, a terrorist cell could have taken this place hostage, and they're armed to the teeth. Outside assailants. A situation I hadn't thought of." "Well, what else can we do?" I asked. "Even if we want to look for an exit and get out of here, the only direction we can go is into the looking glass." "I don't like that metaphor," she noted. Then she relented. "But, yes, I suppose you're right. And if we're going into the deadly genetic engineering lab, we might as well do our job." I finished, and she nodded. "So much for Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez," she muttered as we began to walk to the hallway that would take us to the rest of the building. The lobby was set up so that the receptionist would be able to have seen anybody attempting to enter the complex. There was no furniture, not even a potted plant, just cold white tile, and then the desk. Behind the desk were 2 doors, one on the left, one on the right, and each led to different places, as we'd learned in the briefing. To the left was the business end of the headquarters. Decisions, the counting, and computing occurred there. To the right was the scientific portion of it. Laboratories and testing chambers took up the majority of real estate there, and that was where we were headed. If an answer lay anywhere in this darkened house of death, we believed it to be there. So I took a point, and we entered the looking glass. The lights were still out in the hallway we entered, and it was nearly impossible to see. Scarlett pulled out her flashlight and clicked it on, the thin beam piercing through the darkness and lighting up a tiny area of the hall. It wasn't much, but it was better than the original pitch black, if only by a little. The suffocating darkness surrendered little to help us piece together this mystery. For the most part, it was just a white, sterile hallway like the lobby, without any form of decoration. Every so often we'd see something off, like a dark smear on a wall or a fluorescent light casing that had been torn out of its original shell and smashed on the ground. But for the most part, during the first hallway, there was nothing. However, when we reached the end of it and arrived at a door, things began to ramp up. The door was the same material as the rest of the hallway, and had it not been cracked slightly open, it was highly likely we wouldn't even have noticed it. Upon closer inspection, I saw that there was a thumbprint scanner to the right of it, and it must have utilized electronic locks, which would have gone out whenever the power did. "Do we go in?" Scarlett whispered. "I mean, we're already this far," I replied in an equally low voice. "What's the worst that can happen?" "Don't say that. You know, it never ends well," she pleaded. I rolled my eyes and pulled the door open further, allowing us to look inside before we entered. The room appeared to be a testing chamber for genetic engineering. About 10 feet in there was a glass wall with a heavily secured door in the center, leading to an airlock, and then the area where the tests were performed began. There was a table with straps on it, several cages in the corner, and then a chair with straps on it. All were splattered with dark red, oozing blood. I groaned slightly at the sight, and then the smell hit me through the airlock. It hit me like a ton of bricks, and I keeled over as if I'd been hit by one. I nearly retched at the putrid stink of it, and I thought there was no way I was going to make it any further. I was about to say something when Scarlett beat me to it. "What's wrong?" she asked, pointing her pistol around the room to check for danger. "You okay? You don't smell that," I replied. "Smell what?" "Just the blood," she asked, sniffing. "No, there's something else. There's a body in here or something," I groaned, slowly coming to my feet with a hand from Scarlett. "It's starting to fade a little bit, but you're telling me you didn't smell anything." "No, that's strange," she muttered. It didn't occur to me then that anything was strange about this experience. I just assumed that perhaps the smell had dissipated by the time she'd entered the room, or maybe it was one of those things where people with a recessive gene couldn't smell it, or something. I followed her further. The blood was dried. It looked like it had been for at least a day, and it covered virtually every surface. As I circled around, trying to find any semblance of a clue as to what happened here, I spotted a camera in the top right corner. I was about to point it out to Scarlett when, suddenly, a noise from behind us caused us both to freeze. It was a slight scratching sound, like a very small animal was burrowing around. That was the one corner we hadn't yet searched. Of course it was. And it was also obscured from our initial view by the low wall that cut off the glass viewing area, so we had no idea what was there. The scrabbling continued, noticeably muffled, and then there was an odd squish. The noises paused for a moment, and I slowly turned my head to lock eyes with Scarlett. The unspoken agreement to turn and pump whatever was there full of lead passed between us, and we held our breath for half a second then. We whipped around, firing round after round into the corner, the burst of light obscuring the dark corner from our view. After a few moments, I stopped and she followed. I shined my flashlight into the corner, and I saw a bloodied, shredded, unrecognizable lump. Whatever happened to it? It was dead long before we'd gotten there. What the hell made that noise? She whispered our thoughts along the same lines. I didn't respond out of fear for the answer. We stood there in silence for a moment, neither especially wanting to be the one to volunteer to investigate the pulp. "Fine, I'll do it." I relented, reluctantly returning my gun to its holster. "But you owe me one." She rolled her eyes, and I cautiously approached the lump that glistened sickeningly in the light of Scarlett's flashlight. Upon closer inspection, I could almost make out the form of a human torso, however destroyed. All of the skin, at least the skin that would have been facing us, had been torn off, explaining the bloodied appearance. There was only one arm left, the left one, and it was tucked under the body until I pulled it out. It was clenching something in its hand, a slip of paper, it appeared, and I attempted to pry it loose. "Hurry up," Scarlett urged. I think I heard something out in the hole. I tugged again on the slip of paper. It was wedged tightly in, and the person must have had an iron grip. Then, right as the corpse began to cede its grip, something burst out of its back. It was a flurry of claws, teeth, and a tail, and I stumbled backwards, crying out as the thing leapt out at me. "What is it?" Scarlett exclaimed, her attention having been focused on the entrance to the hallway. As I recovered from my initial shock, I realized that the tiny ball was just that tiny. It looked like a rat, a decently sized one for sure, but there was something wrong with it. I didn't have much experience with rats, but the way it walked, the dull look in its beady little eyes, something about it was off. "You baby," Scarlet teased, helping me up after I picked the rat off of me and tossed it into the corner opposite the one with the body. "What? A little rat scared you? I don't like it," I said, referring to our situation as a whole. "Something is very wrong here." Scarlet glanced around at the carnage. "Really? You have a team of monkeys working around the clock on that one?" "That rat. It wasn't normal," I replied, ignoring her sarcasm. "This place. Why is it covered in blood? That was a human body. What the hell happened to it?" Then I heard what Scarlet must have heard earlier. There was the sound of someone or something pounding on metal. 3 dull thuds. Then a hollow groan drifted down the hallway. "Is that?" I whispered, trailing off. "Yeah," she returned in an equally low tone. "Whatever it is, it's in between us and the exit." Wordlessly, I drew my gun once more, nodded at the door, and we cautiously crept back towards the hallway out of the testing chamber. As we left, the rat scurried off behind us, slightly startling me, and with that, we set off. The unspoken agreement between us was that if whatever had made that sound earlier decided to do so again, we would investigate. Chances are we'd be spending an undesirable amount of time with it anyway in the coming days, I figured. So why not get acquainted early? I obviously wasn't keen on meeting the thing. I only wanted to do it if the opportunity arose, but I was hoping internally that it wouldn't. However, as it often was, my hope was unfounded. Before we'd even reached the hallway point, a terrifying shriek came from the door we'd just passed. Then, before we could even react, something slammed into the glass porthole at the top of the door. I jumped back, training my pistol on that 1/8-inch circle of glass as whatever it was dragged across the clear surface, smearing what looked like blood across it. I held a finger to my lips as Scarlet glanced at me, and she nodded. There was no movement for a while, so I slowly approached the door and reached for the knob when whatever was behind the door roared, and then it slammed its head into the window. I must have jumped a mile at that, and I quickly tried to regain my wits, aiming my gun back at the small viewport into the room. What I saw was disturbing, to say the least. Though it was pressed up against the glass and slightly distorted from it, I could tell it was a human, or at least it had been human at some point. It had stringy black hair that was matted down with blood that streaked across the glass as the creature pressed harder and harder against it, trying to break through. Its skin was a human shade, but it was stretched and waxy, looking as if it could be torn apart like paper. And then its eyes, the emotion or lack thereof. I'd seen in the beady eyes of that rat that 100-fold in the eyes of this creature. There was nothing, 2 empty pits, devoid of all color and life, entirely black. There was no iris, no light, just darkness, as it continued pounding on the door, much to our horror. Several more groans and thuds began emanating from all around that hallway. There were more of those creatures out there, and worse, not all the doors were locked. "Come on, we got to go," I shouted over the din, and we began running down towards the lobby. Hands groped out at us through the darkness, but the worst threat posed to us appeared when we were 10 feet away from the exit. One of the doors flung open at that moment, and I ran directly into it. I was momentarily stunned, and it knocked me off my feet. My gun fell out of my hand, skittering off into the darkness. I heard Scarlet utter a curse, and she was about to start shooting at the thing when suddenly one of them grabbed me from behind. "Help me," I said, still disoriented, trying to attack the creature grabbing me. She whipped her head around, and in her moment of distraction, the one that had opened the door took a hold of her. She slammed her elbow into its gut and prepared to duck under the gap provided by its reaction, but it had none. Instead, it reared back its head, and it sunk its teeth into the upper part of her arm, tearing at it aggressively. She cried out in pain. Meanwhile, I was just hardly avoiding a similar fate. I'd managed to get a position of leverage on the head of the creature, but it was strong and untiring. I could feel my strength giving way when suddenly I heard a door burst open ahead of me. Initially, I thought it was just more of those creatures. I thought that was the end. Then, instead of the jaws of death, I heard a dull clunk and felt the weight lifted off of me. I opened my eyes to see that the creature had been sent stumbling backwards, a serious dent in the center of his face. "Get up," a voice shouted, and a figure appeared in my vision, extending a hand to help me. I accepted his help, and the first thing I noticed when I got to my feet was that he was wearing a surgical mask. Then I noticed he was carrying a crowbar. Seeing my confused look, he said, "I'll explain later. For now, we have to get out of here." Wait, I protested. Scarlet was still struggling feebly against the creature that had bit into her arm, and I rushed to help her, grabbing onto the creature's head and prying apart its teeth. "Go," I said to Scarlet. Free from the thing's maw, she made for the exit immediately, and I followed not too long after. Once I'd stunned the creature sufficiently that it wouldn't be following directly behind us. However, during that time, the way to the exit slowly began to close as more of those creatures pressed in. But somehow we made it through, our masked savior slamming the door shut behind us, sliding in several deadbolts I hadn't noticed before. They looked hastily installed, and I guess they hadn't been there long. Breathing heavily, I slowly made my way to my feet. Scarlet was sitting against the receptionist's desk, clutching her arm, which was oozing blood steadily, and the man in the mask turned back to face me when he finished locking up. "What the hell is going on here?" I panicked. "I suppose you're from the FBI," he remarked. "I'll explain everything. Don't worry." "Well, perhaps you should be worried, but for different reasons. You're going to come with me," he said. "I could explain everything here, but trust me, it'll be easier if we can get to everyone else." The walk to the rooms they'd established as their base was a strange one. The building seemed so normal. It looked just like an after-hours office building. A judge by this time that night had come on our first day. Most of the rooms looked undisturbed, as if someone could step right in and begin working. However, the deeper we got into the business section of the building, the less and less likely that became. At first, it was just little things. A desk would be upturned, blocking a door, or a potted plant would have been knocked over, spilling dirt across the carpet. But then it took a dark turn. Occasionally, dark blood would be smeared in gory streaks across a wall, or a corpse would lie unattended on the ground. Windows were shattered, the carpet was torn up, and wall fixtures lay in shambles on the floor. Then we entered the final hallway. At the end of it were the now sealed doors that led to an elevator. From the blueprints I'd studied, I knew it led to the higher corporate offices. But we didn't go that way, instead entering the conference room in the middle of the hallway on the left-hand side. When he opened the door, he looked back to us, seemingly in thought for a moment. "You two had better wait out here. Just a precaution. Don't worry, they've never made it this far. I'll come and get you in just a minute." I helped Scarlet sit down and then slid to the floor myself, but not before taking a peek into the conference room. It was a dismal sight to behold. There were about 20 people there, all in various stages of grief or despair. Some huddled in groups, others sat alone, and still others sat at the tables, tending to 4 wounded people who lay bleeding out on the large conference room tables. Some of the people wore surgical masks, though some didn't. The man who'd saved us was in deep conversation with 3 or 4 others standing close to the entrance. I glanced over at Scarlet and saw through the darkness that a tear was rolling down her cheek. I thought better of making small talk, and we waited in silence. Then she was the one to break it. "We're in over our heads," she said. "We have to find a way to contact someone. They have to come find a solution to this." "We'll talk to this guy," I replied. "But we gotta keep our wits with us." We knew this was a possibility. Well, not this, but something of this magnitude. We're prepared. We can handle this. "What makes you think that?" she asked. "What have you ever gone through in your life that would make you assume you can handle this?" At that moment, the door swung open, and the man who'd led us there emerged. "All right, I owe you an explanation," he said, sitting down across the hall from us. He paused for a moment, as if expecting a response, but none came. So he continued. "My name is Jace Morrison. I was the director of product management at Rayan. Since there's quite a bit to cover, I'll open it up to you for where we begin. What do you want to know?" I looked over to Scarlet, and she nodded. signifying she'd ask first. What the hell were those things? Did they have to do with the genetic engineering we're here to investigate? She asked, her curiosity almost bordering on eagerness despite her possibly mortal wound. Jace sighed. Yes, they do. They're the product of what we're calling the IMM-1 disease. Those things, they used to be human. And as to your second question, yes, it does have to do with genetic engineering. We're still not sure entirely how, but it is believed that one of the test subjects had an undiscovered, dormant genetic trait that was set off by the experimentation. That trait reacted negatively to the test and produced IMM-1. I'm sure it could be explained better, but you just met those who could do it, and they're certainly in no position to do so. So you were experimenting on humans. What is IMM-1? I interrupted. How does it spread, and what are its effects? I asked, signifying that he didn't need to answer her rhetorical question. IMM-1 is an airborne disease. However, it dies very quickly until it finds a host. If it does so, it slowly begins to take over said host body until it has gained complete control, at which point it rewires the brain to amplify aggression, delete pain receptors, and reduce logical thought. That process will generally take around 12 hours, at least to what we've seen. Invisible signs that the host is infected will not begin to show until approximately the 10-hour mark. Can it be transferred once the host is converted? I asked, nervous that it could have been transmitted to us during our scuffle with creatures. There has only been one instance of it, and it was after the creature had reached full maturity, which takes place 24 hours after the transformation is complete. At that point, the disease becomes fortified, being able to survive indefinitely outside of a host, and is present in the creature's very breath. I looked at Scarlet and saw that she'd reached a conclusion, and that it was one she didn't like. You've known about this, haven't you? She asked accusingly. You know too much about it. You know about the consequences, but if I may guess, you chose to test the creature and disease instead of reporting it. Then an outbreak happened, and now we're here. He sighed again. Yes, but I assure you the decision was entirely Mr. Rayons himself. Let me explain. I'm sure you're also curious about the radio blockout security gate and the unfortunate death of Miss Naomi West, the receptionist. That was all the result of our paranoid CEO, Andrew Ryan. He was the one that ordered the genetic experimentation in the first place, and when he did so, he installed several measures that would ensure the headquarters could become entirely self-sustained if that event did occur. He has since separated himself from us. He locked himself in the corporate suites, where he just so happens to have full control of all security measures, at least the ones he can power with a backup generator. However, before he and those loyal to him retreated, he knew he was going to have to deal with inspectors such as yourselves. So he shot Naomi. He cleaned up the wound and propped her up in the chair so that you'd approach, giving him sufficient time to activate the security gate and frequency jammers. He is entirely delusional. His goal is to wait out the death of every living thing in this building, and then to continue with operations as normal. There's nothing we can do. We wouldn't put our own lives above that of the entirety of humanity, as if we were to make an attempt at escape. The risk would be too great that MM-1 would follow, and I'm sure I don't need to explain the consequences of that. We've managed to secure all of the creatures we know of in the experimentation hallway. There are certainly a few of them that continue to roam unabated. Now, we certainly don't have a method for determining if a subject is or isn't infected, so if you too would spend the night in another office? Yes, of course, I replied. But is there anything you can do for her arm? He held his hands up helplessly. We have no medical supplies. If you've already stopped the bleeding, that's as much as I could have done. Scarlet nodded grimly, and without another word, he left, returning to the conference room. She looked over to me after the door closed. You still think we're ready for this? She asked. It's worse than we thought, I said, repeating her sentiment from earlier. You know how we're going to get out of here, though, right? She asked. I grinned weakly, looking down the hall at the sealed metal doors. I do, I replied. Despite her sudden pessimism, she retained that calculating, planning mind that helped her so much during training, and we remained on the same page. Come on, help me up, she said. I'm not sleeping out here. Let's find a nice office or something. I lifted her up, and we walked around for a few minutes before finding a suitable office. Then, as I helped her to lie down on a rather plush couch, she paused, looking curiously into my eyes. "What?" I asked. Then the curiosity turned to fear. "Give me your flashlight," she ordered. "What's wrong?" I asked, looking behind me. "Just give it," she exclaimed, and I grabbed it, handing it over to her. She clicked it on, then shone it into my eyes. "Show me your eyes," she demanded. And I opened them, squinting into the harsh light. "Dexter," her eyes. She trailed off. "What? What's wrong with them? What's going on with my eyes?" "They're black," she replied. And then the realization hit me. Scarlett slowly propped herself up on her good arm and inched away from me. "Stay back," she said, a look of fear in her eyes. "What?" "No, I'm not," I replied, trailing off. I slowly backed away from her, touching the skin on my face. It might have just been my imagination, but it almost felt waxy like the skin of the creatures. "What's happening to me?" I said. "Jay said it takes 12 hours to convert, didn't he? You'll be fine until then," she said, but her voice wasn't very convincing. Even less convincing was the hand that slowly made its way down to her hip, where it rested mere inches from her gun. "I'll go get him and tell him." I nodded, pacing back and forth nervously. I didn't feel any different as I would have expected someone suffering from a mind-altering virus to feel. The only thing was the paranoia that now set in. Would the creatures still attack me, or would they accept me as one of their own? The darkness was suffocating, it surrounded me, and it felt like I couldn't breathe. I was disoriented entirely and panicking. What could I do? What was there to do? If I allowed myself to become one of those creatures, would I kill Scarlett? The seconds until she arrived back with Jace felt like ours. But she finally did, and he explained the situation. "Well, he's definitely not contagious, so you don't have to worry about being near him, at least for now," Jace said. "But there's not much else I can put in a positive light. We have no idea what the cure might look like, and even if we did, there'd be no way to make it unless we somehow had all the ingredients here in this building. God, how could I have forgotten about the eyes? When did I get it?" I asked. "Did you ever smell something really pungent, something that smelled so bad it almost made you throw up?" Jace returned my question with one of his own. "Probably around the testing chamber, if you made it that far." "Yeah, right when I walked in," I replied, recalling the smell. "It faded after a bit, though." "What happened?" "That was it," Jace said grimly. "The virus has a distinct smell, and once you smell it, there's some time to escape. But if you adjust to the smell, by that time it'll already have gotten inside you." "So why didn't Scarlett get it?" I asked. "Did all the virus go into me?" Jace glanced at Scarlett without saying anything for a moment. Then he gasped. "Wait, did you smell it?" he asked. "No." "Why?" She replied. "Thank you, Jesus," he exclaimed. "There's hope." "What? What is it?" "You're immune," he replied, grabbing her by the shoulders. "When the scientists were testing it, they of course accounted for immunity. They said something about how the scent of the virus is so impactful that an early sign of immunity might be an inability to sense it. That he is getting affected and you not, it's highly likely that you have some form of immunity." "That's incredible," she said. "Can we use this to help Dexter?" Jace let out a long exhale. "There may be a way. It'll be hard. And if it were just you, I wouldn't do it." "That sounds harsh." "Sorry," he apologized. "But it involves us taking back the corporate offices, and that means getting out." "What's in the corporate offices?" I asked the head scientist. She actually wasn't with Ryan completely, but Ryan took her by force in the event that a scientist was needed. Her name is Julia Russell, and she had access to early tests of cures, none of them successful. But given the proper antibodies, I was told they may have worked. "So the antibodies might be in my blood," Scarlett clarified, and he nodded. "But we're against the clock. We have probably 8-9 hours before it's too late," said Jace. "The cure won't work once Dexter's already turned. I don't suppose you have a plan, do you?" I asked, and for the first time a smile crept across his face. "I was hoping you'd ask," he replied. "March 21st. The plan was relatively simple in theory. Scarlett and I would crawl into the upper floors through the ceiling. Then I'd search for the scientist, and she'd activate the elevator, allowing reinforcements to follow in case we met resistance. Once we had the scientist, he'd aid us with the serum, and after adding Scarlett's blood, I'd be cured. And then we could make contact with the FBI, hopefully make it out of this wretched place. We've spent the last half hour or so going over the floor plans as blueprints of all the floors and the ventilation system were accessible from the offices we had access to. Now we're just about ready to go. How does it feel? Scarlett asked as we sat in one of the offices. I don't know, I replied. It's mostly normal, but sometimes I'll feel something inside of me. It might just be thinking about it too much, but it feels like it's rising up, and if I don't push it down, it'll take over. She nodded. I tried to relax about it all. I told myself I was on the verge of getting the cure, and not a lot could go wrong from that point on. Jace had told us that Ryan's pistol was the only weapon up there, and one man with a pistol would be no match for us. We'd been trained numerous times for this specific scenario, and knowing the exact floor plan certainly wouldn't hurt our cause. It was about 5 minutes before Jace came back once more. He knocked on the door as he entered and said, "We're ready when you are. Are you doing okay?" I knew the question was directed to me. Well, I haven't felt a hunger for human flesh yet. Other than that, I'm perfectly fine. I saw the corners of his mouth turn up in the darkness, and he said, "It's good to keep your humor. It helps to retain humanity. Well, you're good to go whenever. You know the way." And with that, he returned to wait with the team he'd selected to aid us in the mission. He wasn't one to mince words. He said what needed to be said, and nothing more. I'd only known him that day, and even I could tell that. I pushed myself off the table I'd been leaning against and said, "We might as well get going. No time like the present." "Agreed," Scarlett said, and we began the cumbersome process of entering the ventilation shaft above our head. A ladder had been produced from some supply closet, but the hardest part wasn't getting there. It was distributing my weight sufficiently that I wouldn't collapse half the system simply by hanging for a moment too long. It took the two of us about 5 minutes to get up, but we did so without disaster. And then the doubly cumbersome process of slowly shuffling our way through the cramped metal space was underway. We'd memorized the directions to get where we needed to go, but there was still the possibility of missing a turn or forgetting a drop was ahead. So we crawled in utter silence, focused entirely on the task at hand. The final trial we had to surmount before entering the upper floors was a difficult one, however. A 20-foot vertical shaft that we would have to climb using nothing but the force of friction. I arrived at the wall earlier than I'd expected, my hands bruising against the back wall a few steps before I'd anticipated. "We're here," I said. "All right, don't fall on me." She said back, "It'd be a shame to have survived a zombie attack, only to be killed by a clumsy partner." For a moment, I just stretched my legs, readjusting to standing, and then I prepared for the ascent. I considered for a moment sticking my flashlight in my mouth just to provide some sense of security, but decided I wouldn't need it. Like the rest of the vents, I had the vertical shaft entirely memorized. I positioned my hands on either side of my body, pressing them against the walls of the shaft to test its give. When I was ready, I pushed on, lifting my feet off the ground and beginning the climb. It was a strenuous effort, inching my way up minute by grueling minute. By the time I was halfway up, my arms, my legs, my torso, everything ached. But I didn't falter. I knew a lot was riding on my shoulders, but I also knew I was more than up to the task. So, I remained calm and collected as I shuffled my way up to the upper echelons of the building. 20 feet may not seem terribly high, but using the method of travel I was, it took a considerable amount of time to traverse the distance, and the clanking sounds of what I could only assume was the ventilation system shifting only made it feel longer. But I did reach the top. When my hand finally felt the ledge, I let out a sigh of relief. Confident as I'd been, there was always the chance that something could go horribly wrong, and I was glad it hadn't. Then it did a shriek, like the one that came out of the testing room, emitted from the darkness, and a hand soon followed. It latched onto mine, attempting to pry my grip from the ledge, and it nearly succeeded. However, I managed to grab on with my other hand at the last moment, saving myself and Scarlet from a very painful drop. "What is it?" she called as I grunted, struggling to pull myself up before the creature could impede my progress further. Unwilling to spare effort for a response, I quickly lowered myself a small amount, then instantly pulled back up, using the excess momentum to knock the creature's legs out from under it. The gamble worked, and the thing slammed its head into the metal of the vent, stunning it momentarily. I used the temporary break to jump to my feet and call down to Scarlet. "There's creatures up here. You have to hurry." The vent was taller up here, and I was able to stand with barely a crouch in my stance. It was still dark, but I could make out several forms further back in the vent. I picked the stunned creature up off the ground and slammed its head into the wall before planting a boot in its back and sending it sprawling towards the others, then extended a hand to help Scarlet up. "Why are they up here?" she asked. "I don't know, but it can't be good," I replied. "Let's deal with them first, then think about it." She nodded, and we ran forwards into the group. There were 5 of them, including the battered one I dealt with, and Scarlet immediately sent a spinning kick at one of them, sending it tumbling to the metal floor. I stepped on it and leapt forwards, sending a punch to the throat for a second. I made contact and prepared to duck under the return swing, but it never came. Instead, it turned to go after Scarlet. Without hesitating, I tackled it, slamming it into the wall, and it didn't make an effort to retaliate, simply struggling against my hold to continue after Scarlet, who was busy dumping 2 of the creatures over the ledge. "They're not going after me," I said, the reason why slowly dawning on me. "Lucky you," Scarlet muttered, as the 2 remaining creatures advanced on her. "Give me a hand with these, would you?" I jumped into action, hitting the one nearer me. The blow glanced off its head with little damage done, but it stumbled to the side and I gave a mighty push as it was off balance, knocking it into the other one. The second one was pushed over the edge, but the first managed to barely keep its balance, teetering on the brink of the abyss. Scarlet finished the job, planting a kick heavily on its chest and watching until it disappeared into the darkness. We quickly began to make our way to the vent we'd made our entrance through, and as we walked, Scarlet said, "Does this mean you're making the transition?" "I don't know," I replied. "If not, I'm getting close." We ran the rest of the way, and when we made it to the vent, I quickly pried it open and lowered myself through. It struck me immediately as odd that the lights were out. It was as dark as it had been on the lower levels. When Scarlet lowered herself down behind me, she noticed the same thing. "This isn't good," she whispered. "You don't think the creatures could have?" The thought faded unfinished into the darkness. "Let's get this over with," she said. I began to wish I had some form of communication with her, or anyone to be honest, but it was impossible with a radio blockage. Before I could think twice about it, though, she was gone, and I was alone in the dark hallway. I touched the wall to get my bearings and set off for the main office where Jace believed the scientist to be held. I walked quietly, willing to accept the delay to avoid a larger delay if someone or something hurt me. Everything was empty. There wasn't a sign of life anywhere, nor were there signs of death that we'd seen downstairs. It was just empty. I hurried down the halls, unwilling to test fate after our experience in events, and after some time I arrived at the innermost office, that of Andrew Ryan. The entrance was lavish, consisting of 2 massive wooden doors, a traditional entryway with very modern security, as what I assumed to be a retinal scanner to the right of the door evidenced. The doors were at the end of a long hallway, and I had just entered it. Even through the darkness, though, I could tell that something was wrong. It was pretty easy, as they were wide open. That wasn't a good sign for me. I guessed that there had been an outbreak, and as opposed to seeking out the creatures, the survivors had made their last stand in Ryan's office. They evidently hadn't fared terribly well. I cautiously approached the once luxurious office, and as I did so, the feeling of lurking evil within me rose stronger than ever before. It knocked me to my knees, and I felt dizzy as I attempted to suppress it. But I fought hard, making my way to my feet, as I knew there was quite a bit riding on me. As I examined my surroundings, fighting the feeling that my head was swimming, I realized that office probably wasn't the best word to describe Rayon's workspace. It seemed like a headquarters in and of itself, as the room I was in looked like a lobby. I could see 4 hallways branching out from where I stood, which had been on the blueprints, but it was very different now that I was looking at them. All of this just for one man. A mental picture of him was beginning to form, and it wasn't someone I thought I could get along with very well. Regardless, I followed Jace's directions down the middle hallway, which just so happened to be where the multiple trails of blood also led. I was about 10 steps down the hallway. When I heard the first clunk, it came from somewhere ahead and I froze, but nothing followed it. I knew I could do nothing but push on and hopefully be prepared for whatever arrived. There were several doors on either side of me, but I ignored them all. Not only were they utterly empty, but my goal was in the deepest part of this office. Jace had assumed, apparently correctly, that they would have tried to put as much space between themselves and the initial outbreak as possible, and that they would be tucked away in the deepest recesses of this office. When I finally did come across it, unlike the rest of the office, it wasn't very luxurious, just 2 plain doors. I tried the handle, it was unlocked, but when I pushed, the door wouldn't budge. I paused for a moment, considering my options, then stepped back, ready to kick it down. However, before I could, one of the doors flung open, revealing a woman in a tattered white lab coat who was pointing a gun at me. "Who are you?" she asked. "And why didn't they attack you?" "I'm an FBI agent, and Before I could finish my explanation, a massive surge of darkness rose up, nearly blotting out my vision. I once again fell over, but this time I couldn't stand up. "You're infected, aren't you?" she said, brandishing the gun at me. "I don't have the cure." "I wish I did, but the formula is incomplete." "Don't shoot," I groaned, holding a hand up. "We have the missing piece." "My partner, she's immune. Go inside. Get a dose ready. She'll be here any second." The virus was racking my body, and I began to convulse violently, and then my rational brain lost control. I remember vague images from that time. The scientist slammed the doors shut. I imagined she barricaded them after, then various flashes of hallways and other creatures as I wandered around the darkened floor. I didn't go too far from where I'd left, and the next thing that happened was Scarlet coming running down the hallway. The creature that I'd become joined a crowd that followed her, and she fired several times at us, one of her bullets clipping me on the leg, thankfully incapacitating me. Otherwise, I might have persisted, and something bad could have happened. The creature that I was crawled for some time, but eventually gave up. The next thing I remember was the lights turning on. The creatures must have an aversion to light because it felt incredibly painful, and the creature cowered there on the carpet. Then, with a jolt, I returned to consciousness. I bolted upright as a sharp pain in my arm brought me back to reality. The events of the day quickly came back to me, and I looked down at my hands to see that the gray was quickly fading, and when I felt my cheeks, the skin was regaining its warm, smooth feeling. Then I looked around. Scarlet smiled, seeing the color return to my eyes, and she said, "It's over. We made it. Thank God." I was getting a little worried there for a moment. I groaned, and she laughed. "What the hell happened?" "They'd shut down the power," Scarlet began. "I couldn't activate the elevators, so I decided to come back for you. But when I got there, it was just DR. Russell. She explained what had happened with you, so she took some of my blood and we had the cure ready. But then there was the matter of finding you. And in the dark, with who knows how many other creatures that look a whole lot like you out there, that would have been easier said than done. So we fought our way to the control room, turned on the power, and while we were at it, we disabled the frequency jammer and radioed for backup, and from there, it was just a matter of time before we found you. Alright, so what happened up here? Why were the creatures here? How'd they get my vents? I asked. "Dear." Russell stepped in. "The virus is airborne, something I tried to explain to Mr. Ryan, but he refused to acknowledge it. As soon as the first ventilation cycle started, it made its way from down there to up here, and several of them began to transform. I barricaded myself in the inner office with doses of the cure already. I mean, I really didn't have much else to do other than wait. So that's what I did." "So where's Ryan now?" Scarlet asked. "He's going to have a lot to answer for." "I don't know, DR." Russell shrugged. I haven't seen him since the outbreak up here began, so he most likely got infected and turned into one of these," she said, gesturing to the corpses either dead or cowering from the fluorescent lights. "I guess that's a fitting end," I said, destroyed by the very thing he created. "So how far out is backup?" I asked. "They'll be here any minute," Scarlett replied. "Advanced teams are getting flown in, and it sounds like Clay is with one of them." "Clay? What does she want?" I asked. "Don't let her hear you talking like that. She's still our superior," she warned. "But my guess would be we're in line for a promotion." The thought was almost comforting. A few minutes later, helicopters landed on the roof, and agents in hazmat suits entered through a rooftop entrance. Once we explained that we'd been cured and that the airborne form of the virus would most likely remain dormant for several more hours until the creatures up here reach maturity. Scarlett helped me up the ladder, and several medics attended to the bullet in my leg. It was such a flurry of activity, agents hurrying around and scientists yelling at them to be more careful. But I've been put on some minor painkillers as the medics fixed up my leg, so I was kind of oblivious to most of it. Once things started to settle down, Scarlett came over to sit by me. "They're gonna burn it to the ground," she said. They talked to Jace. Since it seems like the company's going to him, he thinks that's the best thing to do. "Good," I replied. "Well, that's mission number 1 in the books." I have to say, this was not my definition of routine. I might check out the benefits we get from that, she mused. "Early retirement is a serious option for me." I laughed, but quickly regained my composure as a woman approached me. I'd recognized her immediately as Carmen Clay, and when I did my best attempt at snapping to attention, she held up a hand. "At ease, Agent. You've done enough today." "Thank you, ma'am," I replied. "Well, if my ears are correct, I heard the word retirement getting tossed around here," she said, turning to Scarlett. "I do hope a little mission like that won't be enough to scare off a fantastic pairing like you two." In all seriousness, this was an incredibly strenuous, dangerous, and difficult mission. I could name a dozen veterans here that wouldn't be able to have handled it, and I want you both to know how proud we are of your efforts. "Thank you," I replied. "Also, I do want to let you know what the scientists calculated. If you two hadn't contacted us, there was an 87% chance that the virus would have made it out of that building. And from there, a 63% chance that it would have survived the first day. If it had, it would have become airborne. And in that scenario, there would be a 3% chance that we would be unable to stop it. The world is in your debt, though they may never know it." My jaw dropped at the numbers. "That's it. That would have been very bad, ma'am. I'm glad we were able to do our job." "So are we all," she replied. "You two. You make an excellent pairing. You remind me a lot of myself and my former partner. I think you're going to have great careers with the Bureau." "Well, you'd best be leaving now. I'm giving the both of you paid time off. Go somewhere nice. Enjoy yourselves." We assured her we would, and Scarlett helped me into an awaiting helicopter. As we flew off towards the nearby base, the sun was just beginning to rise to the east. To those who've never experienced a sunrise from a helicopter, I must recommend it. It is beautiful. And with that, my first mission with the Supernatural Division of the FBI came to a close. It was my first, but it certainly would not be the last. I used to love my job. I was a watchman at a wind farm. All I had to do was make rounds a few times a night to make sure no one was messing with the wind turbines. I would read a lot of books, and eventually, if I got bored, I'd bring my portable DVD player and watch movies all night. The only thing that broke up the time was the patrols. I'd arrive every night around 9 p.m. and get relieved by the day shift at 9 a.m. There wasn't much to it. I'd pull up beside the watchman I was relieving. We'd exchange pleasantries. He'd tell me if anything went on during the day, and then he'd be on his way. I don't remember him ever telling me more than seeing some deer or maybe a bear. There were a dozen windmills stretching out over 5 miles, each connected by a dirt road. When I first started working for this company, I'd get out and check the locks on the access door to each windmill. After 5 years, I'd drive by and barely glance at the things. Most times, I'd still be watching my movie or show while I'm driving. Not a whole lot of traffic on that dirt road. I drove into a ditch only once, but I got the car out with minimal difficulty. The worst part about that was the embarrassment. One evening, I was in a hurry and running late. I jumped in the car and flew to the work site with something nagging in the back of my mind. I made it just in time, got my report, and settled into my routine. I did my first round with no problem. Twilight had just faded, leaving the world diving into nighttime darkness. Clouds had been forming all evening, and I saw a flock of turkeys cross my path near one of the fields. That meant it was going to storm. My first round was a breeze. Nothing was happening. I didn't even see animals that I'd usually see, except for the turkeys. Maybe since it was going to storm, the other animals were battening down the hatches and settling in wherever they were. The drive around the 5-mile dirt road circle took around 30 minutes. They don't like us going very fast, and technically we're supposed to check the door on each wind turbine. I and the other drivers have at time, so that it looks like we checked. I got back to the main building a little after 9:30. I pulled out my portable DVD player and started watching Die Hard. Of course, I fell asleep. I woke to the credits rolling. Oh shit, I said, remembering my missed round. I threw the car in gear, and I flew off towards the wind turbines. It was right then that I remembered what I'd forgotten. The flashing light announced low fuel. I cursed myself for forgetting to fill it up yesterday on the way home. This is my second round, I thought. I should have enough to make it through the rest of the night and get to a gas station. This was the thought I clung to the rest of the night. My second round was uneventful. My eyes were constantly drawn to the fuel gauge, but there was nothing I could do about it. Once you're in for the night, you have to stay. If they catch you driving off the job, you are fired. I didn't want to lose such a gravy job, so I stayed put. Although there were a couple of times I considered a quick 2-mile trip to the gas station. The problem was my boss. He was a bit of a prick and liked to pull surprise inspections at all hours of the night. He liked to pretend he was being a nice guy and showing up to see if I needed anything. But I knew why he was really there. If he showed up tonight, I would ask for a couple of gallons of gas. Maybe that would solve my problem and keep him from inspecting as often. Partway through my second movie, Die Hard 2, of course, I went for my next round. It had just started to rain, making my windows fog up, and my defroster wasn't working the best. By the time I went for my fourth round, the weather had made a decision to switch from mildly annoying rain to grab the animals and head for the Ark. It was raining so hard, I could barely see in front of me. I drove at crawling speed. The rain had worn ruts in the road. In some of the lower depressions, there were puddles across the entire road. I was glad I was driving a Jeep. I got right in the middle of one of the giant puddles when my engine gave out. I cranked and I cranked, but it was no use. I was out of gas. I was never going to live this down. I could hear it now. 5 years from now, the other guy will be telling the story about the moron who ran out of gas in the middle of a rainstorm. So now I had a decision to make. Do I stay in the car and ride out the storm, or do I walk back to the main building and wait for the day shift to arrive? I checked my watch. Nearly 8 hours until my relief arrived. The way it was raining, there was no way I was walking back. If there had been an emergency gas can full of fuel, I might have considered it. But the can hadn't had any gas in it for a long time. Yet another wonderful present from my idiot boss. He said it was a waste of gas to have it sit around and grow old. I guess the concept of emergency never crossed his mind. I didn't want to drain my battery, so I didn't watch any more movies. I sat and listened to the rain pound the roof of the car like someone was dropping marbles from the sky. That's when my mind started playing tricks on me. I guess I was bored as I was and decided to have a little fun. I was whistling a little tune in my own off-key way that makes people stuff cotton in their ears when I happened to glance in the rearview mirror and the mirror glanced back. I swore I saw a set of eyes looking in the back window. I whipped around so fast my neck cracked, but nothing was there. I hit the door lock button just to be sure, as if that would help in the middle of nowhere in a downpour. My whistling grew louder and more off-key as I did all I could to avoid looking in the mirror. Eventually, it was too much. My eyes were drawn to the mirror like a magnet. I looked. There was nothing there. I chuckled nervously at myself for being so stupid, and I leaned my head back against the headrest. I don't remember falling asleep, but I do remember waking up to nothing. No sound of pounding rain, no sound of animals, no crickets even. It was unnerving. I lowered the window a few inches and listened. There was still no sound, not even the whooshing of the wind turbine's blades as they spun. I looked at the closest one, and the blades were still. It was unusual for the wind to be so calm that it couldn't muster enough energy to turn the blades. I checked my watch and found I'd been asleep for 4 hours. The storm clouds had drifted off, and the moon had appeared. It wasn't quite full, but bright enough to light the ground and create hundreds of shadows of the trees that surrounded me. It was a beautiful night, the kind of night that made me glad to live in rural Pennsylvania. It made me seriously rethink waiting in a Jeep until morning. My mind held a tug of war as I hummed, should I stay or should I go? I looked at my watch again. In just under 4 hours, my relief would be driving through the gate. What would he do if I wasn't there? It'd be much easier to explain and have him go get gas rather than wait for him to do his first round and find me sitting in the middle of the road. My mind was made up. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment, staring for a long moment at the handgun sitting beside it. I thought about it, but decided to leave it behind. Most of the animals in these woods want nothing to do with humans, and the others are easily scared away with a little yelling. I locked the door as I stepped out, and my foot landed in a deep puddle. I sized the water oozed past my ankle and filled my sneaker. The puddle encompassed the entire car. It was easily 12 feet across. I knew hopping on one foot wouldn't do anything but get my clothes wet, so I put my second foot down and closed the door. I started wading through the puddle to the far side until I found dry land. I shone my light at the closest wind turbine. It was number 5. I knew that was the farthest one from the gate. Being at the halfway point, it didn't matter if I went forward or back. I decided to go forward and started off on my trek. For the first part of my trip, the only sound I heard was my shoes squishing. It was unnerving having your only companions being total silence and hundreds of shadows cast from the trees. I shone the flashlight around in the trees and saw plenty of eyes shining back at me, but they were silent. It was as if they were seated in the pews of a church, and I was walking up the aisle looking for my seat. The eyes ranged in size from small to quite large, and yet none of them made a sound. Were they really afraid of me? I paused to take a break, and that's when I heard it. A footstep behind me. It wasn't a heavy thud. It was a soft squish of grass under a large foot. I whipped around and shone my light where I thought I'd heard the sound coming from, but there was nothing. I panned all around with the light, but all I saw was a gravel road and endless trees. Seeing nothing was possibly worse than seeing something. A deer, a bear, even a coyote would have been something I could deal with, scare away, fight off. But nothing created this void that my mind filled with all kinds of horrible creatures. The unnerving silence continued as I started walking faster, without thinking about it. Even the squish of my shoes seemed louder in the absence of noise. I started thinking about my destination. It was tempting to cut through the woods and save myself a lot of time, seeing I was still on a long loop of road. Had it been daylight, I might have considered it. In the dead of night, though, with a nearly full moon over my shoulder and dawn hours away, I didn't give it a second thought. I thought that perhaps whistling would soothe my jangled nerves. I tried whistling the happiest tune I could think of, but the echo came back to me bent and twisted, like the children's song that plays in a horror movie. I ended my whistling soon after it started. I was halfway through a verse when the tune died on my lips. The sudden unexpected silence brought me the horrible gift of another footfall behind me. I whipped around as quickly as I could, and I shone my flashlight around. This time my mind wasn't given the luxury of scaring me with nothing. This time I saw a set of eyes. They were large and red, but what was most unnerving about them was their distance from the ground. Whatever it was, its eyes were a good 8 feet off the ground. It was 40 or 50 yards away, and hiding behind a tree. But those eyes, they'll haunt me for the rest of my life. Unfortunately, I didn't know how long that would be, especially with such a monstrously large creature obviously stalking me. I'd love to say that I carefully weighed my options and came to a sensible solution to what this creature was and how to deal with it. I didn't. I ran like the devil himself was chasing me. It surprised me that I kept hold of my flashlight. I found speed I never knew I had. Desperation will do that. My mind raced faster than my feet, but there was no solution it could come up with. I could hear the footfalls behind me coming closer. It was going to catch me. It was only a matter of time. And then my salvation rose in front of me, like a lighthouse to a lost fisherman. One of the wind turbines loomed in front of me. I knew the code to get inside in case I ever had an emergency and would need to shut one down. I didn't think I could run any faster, but hearing the footsteps behind me and seeing my salvation in front of me, I felt like the Roadrunner when he put on a burst of speed and disappeared in a cloud of smoke. Of course, that was all in my mind. Reality dashed my illusion as the sound of massive feet grew even closer. It no longer cared about stealth. I could hear it on the gravel road now. My curiosity wanted to turn and at least identify my pursuer, but I forced myself to focus on what was in front of me. Stumbling because I wasn't focused or because of seeing the creature that would be my doom would be catastrophic. The 400-foot tall monolith loomed large in front of me. I envisioned where the keypad was, knowing I had one shot to type in the code before my death. As salvation drew nearer, panic set in. I became obsessed with the notion that I would be caught at any moment. I have no idea what possessed me to do it, other than sheer terror and desperation, but I took the only thing I had available to me, my flashlight, and I threw it backward. By some miracle, I heard a muffled thud and a slight groan. The sounds came from much closer than I wanted, but I still refused to look back. I reached the door to the turbine, punched in the code, and I yanked the door open, straining my arms because of its weight. I was no sooner inside than I pulled the door shut, but just before it latched, a massive set of fingers appeared in the doorway. I pulled with everything I had, feeling muscles strain to the point of breaking. The door somehow continued its momentum towards closing. The giant fingers were slammed between the doors and the frame. They disappeared, and I heard an inhuman howling from the other side as I shut and locked the door. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air as my mind kept replaying the image of the fingers appearing in the doorway. Like a frozen playback, I saw with startling clarity that the fingers were the size of bratwurst covered in brown hair and claws sticking out of them. I lay on the floor panting, searching for any options, but finding none. For the moment I felt safe, but how long would that last? How would anyone find me here? Would they even look, or would they think I was lost in the woods? And the biggest question, what the hell was that thing? I didn't want to speculate because the possible answers were too terrible to comprehend, especially with whatever it was still outside close by. Just as I began to feel my adrenaline abate, there was a pounding at the door. It reverberated through the giant hollow tube that was now my salvation and my prison. I jumped up, not knowing what to do. My only escape route led into the claws of a monster. I looked all around for any help, but finding none, I resigned myself to wait for my inevitable demise. I could see the door vibrate with every impact. I knew it was made of sturdy metal, but even metal has its breaking point. As I searched the small room that was a mere 10 feet across, my eyes were drawn upward. There, attached to the side, was a ladder. It stretched upward into infinity. There seemed to be no end. Thankfully, there were lights along the side every few feet, but that was little comfort. I wonder about my choices. Wait here for the door to collapse, or climb an impossible climb straight up with no rest points, no timeouts, no do-overs. If I climbed, it would be all or nothing. Bailing halfway up just meant I would need to climb the whole way back down to my current hopeless situation. I had no idea if I had the strength or stamina for such a climb, but another round of pounding at the door made my mind up for me. I stepped onto the ladder tentatively, as if waiting for the rung to give out under my foot. After a moment, I stepped onto the second one, then the third. The fourth rung brought near disaster. I slipped and fell back to the floor, landing in a puddle. This painfully reminded me that my shoes were soaking wet. Even though there were grip pads on the rungs, I still needed to be extra careful and step on the arch of my foot, not the ball. I got up and checked for injuries. I was sure there would be a bruise or two if I survived, but other than that, the only thing that was hurt was my pride. The thumping on the door refocused my priorities. I stood and started up the ladder, stepping with the arch of my foot this time. I started out slowly, making sure every foothold was secure before stepping to the next rung. Soon, I gained confidence and was moving a little faster. My breathing was getting ragged as the exertion zapped my energy. I regretted skipping supper. I paused my climb and hooked my arm into the ladder to keep from falling as I caught my breath. It was then that I made two mistakes. One was looking up. The other was looking down. When I looked up, it seemed like I was no closer to the top than when I started. When I looked down, I saw I'd made enough progress to kill me if I stumbled. There was one other thing I saw when I looked down that made me want to cry. Hanging on the wall were several safety harnesses. There was a metal cable that ran beside the ladder. For one brief moment, I considered climbing back down to get a harness, but I realized I might not have the energy to get back up. The rest of the climb seemed to take forever. My breaks became more frequent and took longer each time. My feet were screaming at me for a rest. I was near total exhaustion when I looked up and saw the top of the ladder. The excitement carried me the rest of the way up. I climbed off the top of the ladder and collapsed onto the metal landing. I'd laid there for what seemed like an eternity until my strength returned. I stepped through the door that led into the generator room. It was cramped due to the machinery taking up most of the room. There was a small walkway beside the generator and a hatch that opened to go outside. I looked around and I found a safety rig. I put it on and secured the line to a hook as I opened the hatch to the outside. Dawn had broken and the world was lit with the brilliant orange of early morning. The beauty so overtook me that I didn't notice the wind that had been still after the storm now buffeted against me, threatening to knock me off my feet. I stumbled, feeling grateful for the safety line. I watched as one of the massive blades passed by a few feet away. My only reason to take this risk was to look down and see if my pursuer had given up and left. I slowly peeked over the side, fighting the vertigo from the sheer height. I looked around at the tiny trees below, and I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I was about to go back inside when movement caught my eye. It was the creature. It had come around from the other side of the base of the turbine. I marveled at how tiny it looked from up here, yet it still presented me with a conundrum of how to escape. I stepped back inside and looked around for the answer. After a brief search, I found a radio amongst the controls on the wall. I pressed a button and an alarm went off. I pressed it again to silence it. I tried another button and was rewarded with static. Hello? Hello? Can anyone hear me? I said into the microphone. I repeated it again, still receiving static. On the third try, my boss answered. What the hell are you doing in one of the units? It was an emergency. This was the only way I could contact someone. What was the emergency? I'd rather not say on the radio, I said. Can you come get me? What unit are you in? Number 6. It'll be a little while. Like how long? Like when I get there. He grumbled. The line went back to static. I felt some relief in the fact that at least someone knew where I was and was coming to get me. Eventually, out of curiosity, I climbed back outside and leaned over to check on the creature. My blood turned to ice from what I saw. The creature was looking up at me. It must have heard the alarm. Then it did the thing that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It started climbing the outside of the wind turbine. My eyes were drawn to the horrible sight, and I was unable to look away. I kept hoping it would lose its grip and fall, but it didn't. It got closer and closer. When it was around halfway up, my mind woke to the danger, and it sent my body into action. I lunged back inside and I closed the hatch. I unfastened the safety line and headed back for the main ladder. It took much less time going down the ladder than it did to go up. Several times in my haste, I nearly slipped, taking the express lane down that ended in death. Eventually, though, I made it. As I took a moment to catch my breath, I heard the top of the turbine being assaulted. The bangs resonated down the tube, making them sound even louder. I opened the door as quietly as possible, hoping the noise the creature was making above would cover my exit. As I did, a few brown hairs fell to the floor. I picked them up and stuck them in my pocket. As I slowly opened the door, it made a slight creak. Suddenly, the noise above me stopped. My heart leaped into my throat. I stopped breathing. My mind sent me unhelpful images of the creature, jumping down and dismembering me. As I stood as still as a statue, I smelled smoke that I looked up and black plumes were flowing from the turbine. I ran as fast as I could back towards my Jeep. I refused to look as I heard a roar behind me. I nearly ran into my boss's car as he turned the corner. "What the hell?" he said, getting out. I said, pointing at the turbine. "I see. What the hell did you do?" No, no. I said, pointing towards the black smoke. What am I supposed to be seeing other than millions of dollars literally going up in smoke? I stopped and I looked at the burning machine. But there were no creatures there. I jumped in the car and slammed my door. "Can we go, please?" He just stared at me, then got in the car and drove back to the main building. The whole time I kept shooting glances behind us. He parked in front of the building and looked over at me. "You're going to have to answer some questions." "I know. Would someone please go get my car? I ran out of gas. That's why I was in the turbine." "Why didn't you just wait in the car?" he asked. I opened my mouth to answer, and then I realized what I was about to say, and I stopped, leaving it unsaid. "All right," he said, getting out. "I'll send someone for the car." I followed him inside, and I just lay on the couch in the break room. A short while later, a coworker woke me. "Hey, here are the keys to your car. It's parked out front. And the boss wants to see you," he said. I took the keys and stood. I looked right towards the boss's office, then looked left towards the exit. It only took a moment of decision to turn left and walk out that door. I never returned, but the memory of that night has never left me, and it never will. The following day, I read in the paper about the turbine fire and how they found a carcass of a bear that must have gotten trapped in the blaze. But I knew better. I knew the company would come after me for the destruction of their expensive turbine. I also knew if I told the truth, they'd haul me away in a rubber truck. Either way, I was about to disappear, and my story would never be told. I found a group that specialized in unexplained phenomena. I walked into their office with a bag in my pocket that had 3 brown hairs in it. I knew they'd want to hear my story. If you're ever driving down Route 106 in Michigan and you see a sign for the Greenbrier Motel, you better just keep on driving. Because there is something terribly wrong here, and the last thing I would want is for more people to die. I started working at the Greenbrier Motel a week ago. It wasn't a dream job by my standards. You know, night shift at the front desk, checking people in and out, doing some inventory in the back. I like the peace and quiet, though. It's a little rundown motel on an isolated highway. It gave me a lot of time to read and play computer games on the clock. It also helped that the owner, Frank, didn't seem to care I was a high school dropout with a rap sheet. But on the very first day, I felt that something was terribly off. For one, there was the smell. When the wind shifted, the entire parking lot smelled like rotting meat. I ran to close the windows, but even then I could still smell it. It seeped in through the HVAC system. The motel is surrounded by deep woods, so I figured maybe we were near the kill grounds of some animal. Or maybe it was just the endless roadkill of deer and possums on the highway. Either way, it was unsettling. And definitely not enjoyable. The other thing that struck me as odd were the guest rooms. Some of them didn't have windows, and it seemed like that was intentional. I could see the lines in the paint, the seams outlining where windows had once been. When I asked Frank, he told me that some of the guests asked for windowless rooms, that they were in high demand. He didn't elaborate, and honestly, I was a little scared to press him on it. Things went from strange to downright creepy, however, as soon as Frank left. As I got set up at my desk, a woman walked into the room. She was in her 40s, maybe with black hair and very pale skin. As soon as she stepped inside, she locked the door behind her. "Frank left, right?" she asked me. "Yeah," I replied. "Who are you?" She introduced herself as Matilda. She'd been working here for a decade, cleaning the motel rooms after the guests checked out. After a few minutes of small talk, she suddenly came up to the counter and lowered her voice. "I want to make sure you're safe around here," she said, glancing back towards the door nervously. "So I need you to listen to me, okay? Okay. Whatever you do, don't ask questions. Just check people in, check them out, and mind your own business. And then you'll be fine. My stomach did a little flip. Okay, so it was that kind of motel. Illegal business of multiple kinds, probably. All being conducted under our leaky roof. What if the police come? I asked. Am I going to be arrested too? She gave me a blank stare. The police. Well, yeah. I mean, say they find evidence of, illegal activity in one of the rooms. Will that get me in trouble? I already have shoplifting on my record and I can't. She shook her head. Don't worry about the police. Just don't ask questions. And don't make eye contact. And don't look at their faces for too long. I swallowed. They don't want witnesses. They don't want me to be able to pick them out through a lineup. Okay, I won't ask questions and I won't look at them for too long. I got it. She smiled at that. You have nothing to worry about. As it turned out, though, I did. That night, I checked in on 3 people. And they were almost like caricatures. A big, strong guy in sunglasses that looked like he'd stepped right out of The Godfather. A woman dressed to the nines, wearing more makeup than a clown. A skinny guy in a hoodie that smelled like something chemical and strange. Booty listened to Matilda. I didn't ask questions. I didn't even ask the questions I should have been asking. Like when the hoodie guy gave me an ID that was clearly fake. Don't ask questions and you'll be fine, I thought. I kept repeating that to myself again and again. And I kept my eyes glued to the computer screen, never even glancing up at them. When it hit midnight, I assumed the rest of the night would be smooth sailing. On this lonely stretch of highway, it was unlikely anyone else would check in. I pulled up Minesweeper, yeah, I know, and I played some music on my phone. My peace and quiet, however, was interrupted by the doors swinging open. At 2 a.m., I glanced up to see the guy in sunglasses, the guy who looked like he'd stepped out of The Godfather. Oh, damn. I knew I should have locked the door. I swallowed, and I kept my eyes glued to the computer screen as he approached. Can I help you? I asked, watching him in my peripheral vision. Yeah. Do you have any razors for purchase? I froze. Razors? At 2 a.m.? I instantly got a mental image of him slashing someone up in his room, blood all over the sheets, soaking into the carpet. Oh no. We don't have any razors, I said, keeping my eyes on the computer screen. Can you just check in the back, please? He asked. I swallowed. I really didn't want to go check. I mean, as soon as I turned around, he could do anything. Pull out a gun. Tackle me? Force me into a chokehold and keep me as a hostage? I don't know. But refusing him was just as bad, if not worse. It might make him mad. Really mad. I sat there, staring at Minesweeper on the screen, weighing my options, paying close attention to him out of the corner of my eye. And that's when I saw it. There was something off about this guy. His sunglasses looked like they were slightly too low on his face, like the eyes they were covering weren't in quite the right place. And not only that, but I couldn't see his eyebrows above the frames or the contours of his brow ridge. Everything about the glasses was perfectly flat and smooth. It was like he had no eye sockets at all. Can you just check in the back, please? He asked again. Yeah, sure. I replied. I sprung out of the seat and ducked into the back storage area. I quickly glanced over my shoulder to make sure he wasn't following me. He wasn't. I had half a mind to just stay there, hiding out in the back storage room, until I heard his voice calling out to me again. Did you find him? Thankfully, I did find a few packaged razors next to some other toiletries we kept. I grabbed them and handed them over. I kept my eyes trained on the floor the whole time. Thank you, he said, sounding pleased. And that was it. He just turned around and left. As soon as the door shut, I ran over and locked it. I closed the blinds and sat back down at the front desk. My heart was hammering in my chest. All I could picture was the strange shape of his face. And as I sat there, I realized something. All 3 guests that I'd checked in since the start of my shift, the Godfather guy, the makeup woman, the hoodie guy, they all had something covering their face or head. I mean, I wasn't exaggerating about the woman having enough makeup for a clown. She was wearing a foundation so thick that it cracked around the corners of her eyes and lips. And she wore false eyelashes so long, they almost looked like spider legs. And the hoodie guy had kept his hood pulled so tightly over his head that I couldn't see his ears and hair. It was like they all had something to hide. Morning couldn't come soon enough. As soon as the day shift workers arrived, I got the hell out of there. I floored it back to my house and I slept for a long, long time. I had nightmares all night about faceless people and spidery eyelashes. And then it was time to go back to the motel for night two. Thankfully, it was a quieter night. Although the vacancy sign glowed brightly in the darkness, no one checked in during my shift. They must have all come earlier during the day. So I locked the door, sat down with a cup of coffee, and I enjoyed some reading in the quiet. Unfortunately, the quiet didn't last long. Around midnight, I heard a loud slam from outside. I threw my book down and ran over to the window. The door to room 16 was wide open. I looked around. Nobody appeared to be outside. The parking lot, the sidewalk, was empty. The room itself was dark. None of the lights were on. I walked over to the computer and looked up the room. To my surprise, no one had booked it for tonight. Should I go out and close the door, I thought. I hesitated. It was late. There was no one around except for the occasional passing car. If someone had broken into that room and then attacked me, there would be no one to hear me scream. So I kept the door locked tight and I opened up the security camera feed instead. As I rewound it, I saw what happened. The door had opened and then a woman had walked out of it. I couldn't see her face, just her long dark hair. And then she disappeared into room 22. I checked room 22 on the computer. It was booked to a woman named Cassandra Johnson. I frowned. It looked like Cassandra might be going into our vacant rooms and possibly stealing stuff. Matilda must have forgotten to lock up the room after she cleaned it. I sighed, opened the door, and began walking towards the open room. I thought about knocking on room 22, but then decided against it. Keep your nose out of other people's business, I thought. I'd just lock up room 16 and go back to the lobby like a good little employee. I walked towards the open room, but as soon as I got close, I could smell something horrible. It was like something rotting, decaying. My stomach turned. What did Cassandra do there? Throw up? Stash all her garbage in there? I reached into the darkness of the room, bracing myself. I flicked on the light. The room looked normal. The bed was made. The carpet was clean. But the smell only got stronger. I pinched my nose as I glanced around, starting to feel nauseous. And then I saw it. There was something on the carpet, just barely poking out from the other side of the bed. What is that? It was tan and folded over itself, like a beige sheet or pillowcase had been bunched up on the other side. But all our sheets were white. I stepped into the room, my heart pounding in my chest. Hello? I called out. Nothing. The smell got even worse as I approached the bed. Nausea washed over me. I forced myself to keep going, pinching my nose, swallowing down the urge to throw up. I peered over the side of the bed and froze. There was a pile of beige, slightly translucent material folded over itself on the other side. But I instantly recognized certain shapes attached to it. Awfully familiar shapes. Like 5 fingers. It looked like a glove made of skin poking out from under one of the folds. It looked like someone had shed their skin. I stepped back, my legs shaking underneath me. It can't be. I backed away towards the door. My throat was dry. Because it didn't make sense. It didn't even make sense for it to be a murder. There wasn't any blood on it. It hadn't been cut off by someone. It was like a snakeskin. Clean and perfect. Holding the shape of its wearer like a ghost. I ran out of the room. And I saw walking toward me down the sidewalk from room 22. Strands of her dark, straight hair hung over her face. But I could tell through her hair that there was something wrong with her face. Her eyes and her lips were in slightly wrong positions. She walked toward me fast. Her shoes clicked on the pavement. I didn't want to find out what she'd do if she caught me. And I whipped around and I ran as fast as I could. I could hear her running behind me. She was running much faster than what I thought possible for heels. But I forced myself to go faster. And then I was inside the lobby. I clicked the lock shut and I collapsed in the back room where she couldn't see me. And that was when the whistling started. Just outside the door, I could hear her whistling. The source of the sound shifted as she circled the lobby area, looking for a way in. I heard it at the door, then at the back, then through the side windows, then back at the front door. This went on for an hour. Finally, the whistling faded, but I didn't move. I stayed there. I huddled in the back storage room until dawn broke. As soon as the day shift arrived, I booked it out of there as fast as I could. I wanted to quit. With everything the way it is, I wanted to just walk away. But I needed the money. I already knew how hard it was, finding a job with a rap sheet. It was either go back to this job, no matter how scary it was, or face eviction. So I went back. When I got on shift, though, I pulled Matilda aside and I told her what I'd seen. I asked her again and again if my life was in danger. Asked her what the hell was going on here. If other people were in danger, too. I promise you, as long as you mind your own business, you'll be safe. So that's what I did. I kept my head down, and for the next few days, nothing really happened. Sure, there were a few people who checked in that were wearing hats or sunglasses or extra makeup. But I just tried to avoid eye contact with them. I tried to keep my head down and my nose out of other people's business. But then came that one night in November. It was raining then, I remember. The rain came down in sheets. And every so often, I heard thunder shake the windows. I wasn't expecting anyone to come in that night. I didn't see that many cars driving by on the highway. The rain seemed to keep everybody in. But then I heard a knock. And when I looked up, I saw a man staring in the window. A chill ran down my spine. He was wearing a hoodie that kept his face mostly in shadow. And he was aggressively banging on the window. It was like he was in a hurry. I grabbed the mace I kept under the counter. And I slipped it into my pocket. And then I approached the window. "Do you have any vacancies?" he asked in a low voice. I could barely hear him over the pounding rain. The vacancy sign glowed brightly behind him. There's no way he could have missed it. Yeah, come on in," I said. I unlocked the door with one hand, and I gripped the mace in my pocket with the other. He stepped inside. Rain dripped off his jacket and onto the floor. I barely glanced at him. I just turned around and walked back around the counter. And then I sat down at the computer, keeping my eyes fixed on the screen. In my peripheral vision, I could see him. His eyes fixed on the screen. He was leaning over the counter. Face was only about a foot or two from mine, so close that I could smell the stale mothball odor coming off his clothes. So close, I could hear drops of water plopping onto the counter from his sleeve. "Can you go faster?" he asked, his voice raspy in his throat. "Sorry, sir, I'm going as fast as I can," I replied, my heart starting to pound. It's an old computer. My fingers slipped on the mouse as I rushed to click the buttons. "I don't have all day," he growled, leaning even closer to me. I wanted to look at him. My eyes, I don't know, they were itching to glance up at the man that was 6 inches from my face. But I forced myself to stare at the screen. Whatever the hell was going on here, I was not going to be a witness. I was not going to look up and find myself face to face with a gun. Your name?" I asked. As soon as the words came out of my mouth, I froze. I needed a name to book the room, that's all. But maybe he wouldn't see it that way. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I wasn't supposed to ask for names. Maybe that was part of Frank's understanding with certain guests. Thankfully, nothing happened. After a second of hesitation, he replied, "Daniel Jones." The name struck me as fake. Common first name, common last name. But who even cared at this point? I typed his name into the system and completed the booking process. He paid for the room in cash, which was another thing that made me uneasy. But I tried not to think about it. I turned my back and I took a key off the hook. "Room 7, I said, handing it to him. He thanked me and then waited by the door. I waited for a minute, then 2, but he didn't leave. "Do you need something?" I asked, careful not to make eye contact. "Can you escort me to my room?" Hell no, I thought. There's no way I could go out there in the middle of the night with this creepy guy. That was like a death sentence. I glanced out the window and spotted his car, a beat-up sedan in one of the nearby parking spaces. The murder scenario played right out in my head. Shove me into the hotel room, kill me, stick my body in the trunk, and then throw it in the middle of the woods. Or maybe worse. Maybe my skin would end up crumpled on the floor of one of the rooms. Maybe he'd take my form or turn me into something that sheds its skin like a snake that has eyes too low on its face or no eye sockets at all. And the longer I looked at him in the corner of my eye, the more I noticed things about him. There were smears of dirt on his sleeves and on the hem of his pants. Like he's been digging a grave, the voice in my head added. His face, half hidden in shadow, was sunken and gaunt. His jaw was covered in gray stubble. His teeth were a horrible shade of grayish yellow. Can't you just go yourself? I have something I need to do here. You know, my boss is going to get real pissed if... You can take 2 minutes to walk me to my room, damn it. I sat there in stunned silence. He was very mad. He sounded furious. Okay, I said finally. My fingers curled around the mace in my pocket, and then I joined him at the door. I'll walk you to your room, I said. He didn't thank me. He just grabbed the door and swung it open. It nearly hit me in the face. I stepped out into the pouring rain with him. The parking lot was like a lake, and our feet sloshed loudly through the water. The cold water seeped through my sneakers, and I shivered. I followed the man to his car, staying a good 15 feet away. He popped the trunk, and I held my breath, but thankfully there was only a duffel bag inside. He put it on his shoulder and started for room 7. I followed him at a distance, staying several feet away, watching him fidget with the key. "You got a lot of other people staying here right now?" he asked as he slid the key in the lock. "Some," I replied. "Not great weather for it," he said. "Not really," I replied. "The storm's supposed to clear tomorrow." "It'll be good weather then," he said. "Wow, this is taking a while," I thought to myself. And that's when I looked down at his hands, and I noticed that he wasn't really trying to get into the room. He was just inserting the key, pausing, and then pulling it out over and over again. He was stalling. He was keeping me here on purpose. I looked up from his hands just in time to see him staring at me. His blue eyes were intense, studying me. I wanted to run away. Every inch of me was screaming to get out of there. But the guy had like 7 inches on me. He was really thin. Probably catch me in like 2 seconds. I was never much of a runner. I slipped my hand in my pocket, curling my fingers around a mace. "Do you need help getting into your room?" I asked. He shook his head. "I'm going to go back to the front desk," I said, taking a step back. As soon as I said that, he froze. His eyes widened as he stared at me. Slowly, he shook his head, his lips stretching into a grimace that showed his yellow teeth. "Don't go," he growled, his voice barely audible above the rain. "Stay exactly where you are." I leapt into action. I whipped the mace out of my pocket and I held it in front of me, pointing it right at him. "All right, don't get any closer, man." My finger hovered over the trigger. And then I heard it. Whistling. Someone was whistling behind me in the rain. The song cut through the raindrops like a knife. It was the same eerie tone that a woman had whistled a few days ago. "I'm sorry," the man said quietly, his blue eyes locked on mine. "But I need it, babe." I stared at him. My brain couldn't even process what he was saying. "Babe?" I took a stumbling step back. The whistling grew louder. I whipped around, and through the rain, I could see someone walking through the parking lot, barely lit by the flickering street lamp. The mace fell from my hands, and then I turned and ran as fast as I could towards the lobby. The whistling stopped, and then I could hear loud splashing footsteps growing louder with every second behind me. I swung the door open, slammed it shut, and I locked it. I pulled the blinds down over the window. Panting, I opened them with my fingers and I peered out into the night. There was a woman standing in the parking lot, the same woman I'd seen a week ago. Her hair and clothes were drenched with rain, but she was smiling. This big, crooked grin that sent chills down my spine. And her eyes were strange, wide and wild, incredibly light blue. In the darkness, it almost looked like she didn't have irises at all. Just 2 pinholes for pupils staring right at my door. She took a step forward. I ran over to my desk, grabbed my cell phone, and started dialing 911. Come on, operator. I'm at Greenbrier Motel, and there's this guy and this weird woman. I was cut off by a loud thump nearby. I ran to the window and looked out. The man who'd booked room 7 was running towards the woman. He was holding something up in the air, a short dagger shining silver in the rain. He's attacking her, I said into the phone. The woman's face changed. Her features twisted. Her grin crept up to her eyes. Her arms cracked and stretched. She blinked and her eyes turned pure white. Her body twisted unnaturally at the waist so that she was facing the man. With fast, jolted movements, she leapt at him. And within seconds, he was dead. She stood on all fours above him, her knees bent the wrong way, her fingers far too long. With another horrible crackling sound, her neck stretched out 2 feet long, twisting like a snake. And then she looked at me. I leapt away from the window. I opened my mouth, tried to speak, but I couldn't. And by the time I made it back over to the window, the woman was standing right there looking down at her kill. She looked normal now. And then she stepped over his body and walked towards the rooms. To my horror, she pulled out a key and opened room 22. And then she disappeared inside. The police arrived a few minutes later. I begged them to check room 22, that something horrible was inside. But then they knocked on the door and a completely normal-looking woman opened it. I watched from the lobby. I couldn't hear that much of their conversation over the pouring rain. But they weren't arresting her. How weren't they arresting her? They just seemed to be having a friendly chat, asking her what she'd seen. And then they thanked her and came back to me. Hey there. So yeah, we're in need to see the security tapes from tonight, please. The officers said. But when I showed them the tapes, they got quiet. One of the officers made a call to someone, saying something about an infestation. The other 2 officers ushered me out into the lobby, their faces serious. They told me not to leave as they talked amongst themselves in hushed voices in the corner of the room. And then they approached me. All right, well, you didn't see anything tonight, one of the officers said, leaning in close. You got that. But what about? Okay, listen to me very carefully, he interrupted. You didn't see anything. Just like you never shoplifted in your life, okay? What? I asked. Do you understand me? He asked. The silence stretched out between us. Yeah, I got it, I said, my voice wavering. I didn't see anything. I left the motel. I didn't see anything. I left the motel that night and never went back. I planned to never speak of what I saw, to keep my mouth shut just like they told me. But after many sleepless nights, I realized that I need to warn people. I can't have another person dying because of these things, whatever they are. So I'm begging you, if you're driving through Michigan and you see that there's a vacancy at the Greenbrier Motel, keep driving.